Okay, today I'm going to talk about a very good, very special book. But first I want to talk about the publisher, because I suspect that the publisher has a lot to do with what makes this book very good and special. The publishing house is called Hamilcar Publications, and it's based out of Boston. It's run by two guys, a business partnership. The editorial brains behind it is a guy named Kyle Serafine, and his business partner is a guy named Andy Womack. They've known each other since high school. They played basketball together in high school in Rockport, Mass. Gotta love that. I would say that the publishing house is really based on Kyle Serafine's interests. He's a fan of boxing and jazz and hip hop, and I would say popular music in general. I think that's how small publishing houses have to start out. He's branching out more and more. It started out with boxing books, moved into true crime, noir, mixed in with boxing, and he's recruited or cultivated this impressive stable of writers. He started out, or his first big book, I'd say, was this book called Dark Trade, Lost in Boxing, by this British writer named Donald McRae. I don't know if he's British, might be South African, but he writes for The Guardian, which is a British paper. And I hear it's got some memoir in it, a big fat book, so I may check that out. But this stable of writers that he's created, a guy named, for example, Carlos Acevedo, who came out with a book called The Duke, The Life and Lies of Tommy Morrison, and also another book called Sporting Blood, Tales from the Dark Side of Boxing, which is a collection of short pieces on boxing. I read one on the great fighter Aaron Pryor, and it is impressive because it's like one punchy vignette after another, like coming out of nowhere, and at the end triumph, which is exactly the way Aaron Pryor fought. So, you know, these guys are artists, these writers. Also, they've got this writer named Todd D. Snyder, who wrote a book for Hamilcar Publications on Bandini, who was Ali's hype man and who I think was a forerunner in hip-hop culture. Also, he wrote a book about the connections between hip-hop and boxing. But I'm interested in Todd D. Snyder because he wrote a memoir, not for Hamilcar Publications, but for West Virginia Press, called 12 Rounds in Lowe's Gym, Boxing in Manhood in Appalachia. That is on my list. I can't wait to read that. Also, I think Hamilcar Publications is coming out with a book called Lights Out, which is the biography of the great fighter James Toney, by a writer named Robert Anasi. Wonderful writer. Wrote a wonderful memoir called The Gloves, which I reviewed here in Book Rants. Also, they recently came out with a book on Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors, by a guy named Bob Batchelor. So, you know, I think it's ambitious, although it only started in October, late October 2018, but it grows. But it grows according to a particular artistic vision. I mean, I've got no problem with artsy-fartsy effete books. Sometimes I like them. But there's nothing artsy or fartsy effete about the publications that come out of Hamilcar Publications. It's gritty, you know? You know, there's a motto that's sort of said out of the side of the mouth between, I guess, the inner circle of Hamilcar Publications, which is, we talk no shit and we don't fuck around. Put that motto on my dollar bills, man. Okay, or at least put it on my books, okay? I'm gonna read a bunch of books by this press, without a doubt. So let's move into, all right, the book that I'm gonna talk about today, which fits right into this vein, Lowlife, low is in parentheses, a memoir of jazz, fight fixing, and the mob, written by Charles Farrell and published in 2021. The title speaks for itself, but I would say that it's a book about a guy with tremendous talents, artistic, intellectual, and also a talent for street savvy. What he calls birthright, which he learned from his grandparents, which is what he calls something to always bail him out of trouble and to keep him free. I would say that the book is about how he used and misused, handled and mishandled, even neglected those talents. Although misused, mishandled, and neglected only if the goal was conventional worldly success. If the goal was to live an extremely eventful life on the margins dangerously, well then he succeeded, you know, beyond all bounds. his main talent, artistic talent, was music, piano playing. But he also obviously has a literary talent. And I kind of wish in this book he got into what fed that. He doesn't. But he does get into what fed his musical talent. He writes really well about that. He worked or learned under John Coltrane, that genius of a jazz saxophonist. He was so naturally talented and such a purist, Charles Farrell, as the pianist, that he never really played like for long periods with anyone. He never really made a name in it because he kind of had disgust for any sort of music that didn't challenge him on a regular basis. He just kind of got disgusted with it. You know, the cliche example is like Marlon Brando, who just was too good at acting. I kind of think that Charles Farrell kind of falls into this category as a musician. You know, there's a type of memoir where a great personage reflects on his life, right? And those great personages are often like great artists and people themselves. I think Charles Farrell in the underworld is a great personage. But for example, if I'm going to compare this memoir to something, maybe I would compare it to like James Salter's memoir, Burning the Days, right? Because in that memoir you have, Robert Redford, you've got Charlotte Rampling, you've got Roman Polanski, you've got Irwin Shaw, I think even Jack Kerouac makes an appearance in that book. But those aren't the best parts of the books, although those parts are great. But the best parts of the books are when James Salter is writing about, flying jets in the Korean War, or being a lover, or being a reader. Or another memoir I might compare it to is Without Stopping by Paul Bowles. Paul Bowles was that great writer and great musician, okay, because he studied under Aaron Copland and wrote some great classical compositions. But he was also a great writer. He wrote The Sheltering Sky, that great novel. And I mean, 3 just masterful short stories. I mean, to me anyway. One called Pages from Cold Point. Check that out. Another one called A Distant Episode. And this great long short story, maybe even a novella called, what was it called? Here to Learn. And he had this cult following. He was considered a guru to the Beats. And I think the Rolling Stones did go down to see him in Tangier, and so there's this great scene in Without Stopping. I don't think the book is that great unless you love Paul Bowles, but there's a great scene where Paul Bowles comes in on Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, and Mick Jagger is sitting on a couch, like eating like this lamb shank, and at his feet is a naked woman sleeping, So, the book, Charles Farrell's book, has these scenes also with great people, because he has, on the boxing side, work with, Floyd Patterson, the great heavyweight champion, beloved, the kind of clown of a heavyweight champion, Leon Spinks. He's also had, he managed Mitch Blood Green, who was a legendary rival to Mike Tyson. He has interactions with Jerry Quarry. I think there's also a short interaction with Marvin Hagler in the book. There is. But these are not the best parts of the books. He also has interactions with John Coltrane, as I said. He's played with Ornette Coleman. I mean, one of the greatest saxophonists of all time. I think there's a cameo with Janis Joplin. But these aren't the best parts of the books. And how do I know they're not the best parts of the books? Or maybe they are, but it's not because he's dealing with these great personages. Because there's these scenes he managed a fighter named Martin Foster, who was a white heavyweight. Those scenes are unbelievably good. Scenes with a champion called Tyrone Booz, who I'd never heard of. Again, amazing scenes, heartbreaking scenes. I mean, he just writes so well about the underworld of boxing. Playing as a kid in a place called Paula's Lounge, where, the dialogue is so good in this book. I mean, people talk about the dialogue of Don DeLillo, how authentic it is, and it is authentic. I mean, I'm a great fan of Underworld too, his great novel, and, White Noise, but I would just say that the dialogue in a book like this is better than the dialogue in Don DeLillo. I mean, there's a scene where he's at Paula's Lounge and he's playing at this mob club, and this hypnotist would come in, and, you know, bring people up on stage, and they would start to take their clothes off. And he quotes this mobster as saying, "This fucking jerk off in his white tuxedo is gonna make half faggots out of all my friends." It's just so authentic, the dialogue, you know? You know, he talks about, you know, the musical taste of mobsters, or, you know, the corrupt aspects of boxing, which he's clearly a part of. Or, you know, there's this one scene where he's taken in a van by these two New York mobsters who have come down to North Carolina, and this low-level matchmaker tries to pull a fast one on the mobsters, and they catch him, and it all gets worked out, but they take him out on this van, and it's just like spine-chilling. They're in this van. There's the way that Charles Farrell writes it is that the van smelled like sweat and cologne, aftershave, and matchmaker's tobacco. It smelled like angry and terrified men. It's just fantastic. There's this scene with this prostitute named Vanessa, this physically perfect prostitute from Madrid, who is like married to this ex-serviceman who no longer wants her, and she has this unbelievable voice, but it's unmarketable, but she recognizes this musical talent in Charles Farrell, and like kind of latches onto him, and there's nothing he can do for her. The scenes in Las Vegas are just fantastic. There's a scene of the Crystal Love Ranch that's just like a bunch of trailers connected by handicap ramps. I mean, one scene after another. And then, you know, he's got these scenes where he's like in hiding, and he's living in Puerto Rico, and he's at his beach house, and these scenes, I mean, they're little like literary masterpieces in storytelling, where he describes his dogs fighting on this hill above the beach, or this miracle that takes place or that he witnesses in this town called Rincon. You know, and these literary masterpieces, I would say, these 4 or 5 page gems of storytelling, right? There's no whiff of the literary. No whiff of the literary. There's nothing self-conscious. There's no sense of him, you know, impressed by his own craft or skill, imagining the reader going, ooh, no. He's just nothing meta. Just fucking nailing it, man, again and again. You know, I mean, there's a scene, for example, where he's training his white heavyweight, Martin Foster, and he writes, "That fat fuck couldn't fight." It is the perfect sentence, perfectly placed. But you don't get the sense that he's excessively proud of that. It's not that he takes his writing talent for granted, just like he didn't take his musical talent for granted. I'm sure he worked very hard on the book, just like he continues to practice his music, although he never performs it. Another thing about this book, there is an absolute lack of racism in the book, although he uses the N-word regularly, I would say. You know, there's a sense today of not being racist is the same as treating a certain marginalized people as though they were something special. By that I mean more special than any other group of people, okay? He doesn't tiptoe around anything, okay? Let me just read you something from this book, okay? I'd spent a lifetime around black people in music, in boxing, and in my daily life. I'd often lived with black people. I got along with black people. My second wife, long departed, was black. But I didn't try to act black around black people. I knew that it was tough being black. That was why I liked being white. It gave me an advantage in nearly every exchange. It wasn't fair, but I would have been insane not to use it. That's what I'm talking about, this book. That's what I'm talking about, you know? He just lays it out straight, the truth. Okay? So, do I recommend this book? Absolutely. You like a fly on the wall, it's compulsive reading, a fly on the wall in this kind of underground world. I looked forward to every moment, my nights when I went to this book, I looked forward to the nights reading it. You know, I can't believe it's not a breakout book. I'm sure it's going to grow a cult following, okay? I hope this review is part of that cult following. In a perfect world, it would be. I hear that Hamilcar Publications is coming out with a paperback soon. Pick it up, man. Pick it up.